the budget, which was given by Malacanang, but which I am one of them who will be begging you to find a solution to add a little bit, Your Honor.
Yes. No, I do not disagree at all with these statistics, Mr. President, that the income level of Filipinos will not be able to, will not enable them to send all their kids to tertiary education. I think absolutely not at all. But especially the lower income level. As you said, 20% of Filipinos have income above 300,000. And even that 300,000 and above level, Mr. President, probably they don't send their kids to SUCs. They send them to the Ateneos and the La Salles and the Miriam of this country. Some send to the UP because it's a competitive, and some pass the UPCAT. But many of them go to private higher education now. But that doesn't mean, Mr. President, that there is a correlation between the inability of the Filipino family to spend for higher education and the small number of SUCs. In fact, if you correlate it, there will be probably more SUCs that can absorb what theoretically could have been in higher education in public universities, Mr. President. But I think many of them are prevented from doing so because right away, only 23 enter tertiary education from high school, and of that 23, only 15 graduate. So there's a huge universe, Mr. President. There's a huge community of non-graduates in our society, and I think that's where I think we are failing because except for the formal alternative learning system, I don't think there is a system that takes care of almost a community equal to those formerly in school, Mr. President, the out-of-school segment of our society. So it goes back again, Mr. President, to living standards. The Filipinos don't have that kind of income level that will enable them to send their kids to higher education. I agree with you, Mr. President. Tertiary education, especially in this age of information and communication, is going to be almost an essential tool, an essential preparation for life. Without that, Mr. President, you'll be as illiterate as you were, as if you didn't go to college, to school at all.
Your Honor, I could see the point and I agree with what you're driving to, no? Meaning, nandyan ang state use at kaya nilang mag-absorb. But the point I was driving at is that because they are hard up, because we're not giving them enough money, they have to either limit their students or increase tuition fees. So, give you an example, Your Honor, in Metro Manila. De La Salle University for a computer science course is 60,000 per sem. De La Salle St. Benilde University, 20,000. San Beda College, 55,000. San Juan de Letran University, 42,700. San Sebastian, 37,463. But, for example, TUP, they will offer the same course for 4,800. Pamantasan ng Lungsod ng Manila, 3,648. That the Taguig City University, we have 11,000 students, not a single cent, not even their ID. The city government decided to allot 200 million and to just charge everything to the city government. But the point, Your Honor, is this. If we give them more money, I think we will not only increase the 23% that will come in, the chances are they would also be more than 14% that will graduate because we will be giving them an alternative to the high cost of private school. But even assuming, Your Honor, that we do not target yet the quantity, let's target the quality. Some will say, but La Salle would be better than TUP or than the local colleges. Sometimes it's debatable. For example, UP, theoretically, UP is of course, it's our premier state university and it has much more resources than others. But even when PGH did not have that big amount of funding, it was still our premier medical school, Your Honor. No? So the point I'm driving at, Your Honor, is that if we start with the premise that dapat ang tertiary education ay sagot ng magulang, and we start with the premise na we're already providing, then natural po, magkukulang ang pondo nila. And this was in the budget message last year. I haven't seen this year if the Aquino government has changed its policy. I would agree that you cannot guarantee 100% tertiary education because it might be too expensive. But a while ago, and allow me to be proud of my own city government, for this year, they allotted 100 million for scholarships. Next year, 200 million. And the target is that by 2014, every Taguigueño will be guaranteed 30 to 50,000 a year for the school of their choice. No? It can be done in the local level because they don't have to take care of everything. They can choose pet projects. I know in the national government, we have to take care of the DND, you have to take care of the DOH, so it's difficult to say put all the money in the SUCs. But if you looked at the graph a while ago, Your Honor, hindi man lang tumataas eh. Hindi man lang every year dagdagan natin ng konting pondo ang SUCs in nominal value, no, or in real terms, Your Honor. In nominal value parang tumataas, but in real terms and sa dami po ng enrollment. I know for a fact, Your Honor, that you as a senator and as a advocate in education, you have been responsible for putting up so many scholarship programs, not only in the CHED, not only for science students, not only in your private capacity, not only in the arts, no? But even those scholarship programs, the cheaper but more quality education you have from SUCs, the more students that can come in. But of all the departments and of all the programs of government, there seems to be a resistance by this government of pouring more money into the SUCs, Your Honor.
I don't disagree at all, Mr. President, with your thesis. In fact, we are already greatly underspending in education, and of all the sectors of the education system, I think we are underspending the most in tertiary education, which is the most crucial in a person's life. Yeah. Now, that's why in this particular budget year, Mr. President, with the help of our chairman and the CHED and the other departments like the OST, DA, we have tried to get some money from the other departments, as I will explain later on or shortly, so that we can augment the funding that goes to the SUC. For instance, you're right, the figures go nominally up, but in real terms, the per capita spending is going down, Mr. President. And so we are really, Mr. President, at the crossroads. Do we continue financing what a system that is just perhaps expanding in terms of number, but also spreading misery all around because the pie is not getting bigger? And I think it's right for Chairman Licuanan to say, let's have a pause. Let's survey the whole terrain and see whether we can rationalize structurally, not to remove or eliminate any of those institutions, but rationalize in terms of curriculum, in terms of deployment of faculty and recruitment of faculty. And from then on, then we begin really helping vigorously the advance of tertiary education. Now, to me, Mr. President, the principal fault in our tertiary education system is not so much that the state is not giving enough to public tertiary education. It springs from the fact that 85% of our higher education enrollment is through the private higher education system, which, as you know, Mr. President, responds to market demand, even in terms of academic offering. There's a time when nursing was so popular, so everyone was offering nursing. There is now this time when when IT is so popular, so everybody is offering information. And so we have a situation where we have a glut in nursing, we have a glut in maritime graduates, etc. Because the private sector is responding to what they perceive to be the market demand now. But since it's a private endeavor, they're motivated by genuine desire to educate. Many of them, unfortunately, Mr. President, are motivated less nobly, perhaps more by moved by profit than by the enlightened mission of education. So that is the situation. That's why, Mr. President, we are proposing not that we want to remove or even diminish the role of the private sector in higher education. In fact, that is a great boon to us, Mr. President, because the private sector in the Philippines, unique in the whole of Southeast Asia, is so active, handling 85% of the education of our youth, which the state, if it were to handle like Malaysia, 99 or 95%, or Singapore, almost 100% of the education, we would be going bankrupt, Mr. President. But I think there must now be more than just physical consolidation and rationalization. We will now must begin to put together a massive, large-scale student loan and financial assistance, Mr. President. Then we are going to address the root cause of our low higher education attendance, low graduation rate from tertiary education. I think ultimately that's what we're proposing to do, Mr. President. Not just student assistance, but also an institution, a public institution that can extend assistance to private tertiary education in terms of capital outlay. Because many, Mr. President, not all, there are some exceptional private higher education which have outstanding laboratories and libraries better than any of the public state universities. But many of them don't even have playgrounds, campus, laboratories, libraries, Mr. President. So that if we can put together such a system, Mr. President, then your insight that we are really that we are shortchanging our youth through by starving higher education system is going to be corrected in time, Mr. President. I hope. Maybe beginning with this administration and onwards.
Your Honor, on a policy level, I don't disagree with you. Now, I completely see your point, and that was you articulated basically the problem of the higher education system, and let me further your argument, no, that they may be motivated by profit. On the other hand, they may also be more efficient. Because they are, in fact, motivated by profit, they also have better facilities, and they attract people who can pay. But again, the answer is still competition. So by fully funding UP has been a good competitor to San Beda, Ateneo, UST, LaSalle. But if you compare it to the other state universities that were giving 50, 100, 200 million, hindi sila makapag-compete. Of course, money is not everything, but professors and faculty also have to make a living. So I agree fully, Your Honor, that we should increase our scholarship programs, our student loan programs and everything. But I also do believe that there should be a policy change in thinking that higher education equals a better future or more work, more jobs, and everything. Rather than thinking that SUC should be self-sufficient, bahala kayo sa buhay nyo. Because the economic conditions are not ripe for SUCs to fund themselves, no, or to increase tuition fees, etc. Let me just put on record, Your Honor, that the debate becomes really difficult because we're looking from the theory and from actual practice wherein universities develop and the academic freedom flourishes under certain conditions. At tama po kayo doon. That's why you want to consolidate or hindi pwedeng sa isang region kalat-kalat or may isang building ka lang, university na yon. On the other hand, what's the reality on the ground? Yung pamasahe lang ay napakamahal, so the closer the school is to the student. That's why you have congressmen and mayors and governors wanting satellite schools because ang dami nagda-drop out dahil dun sa kulang ng pamasahe. But if you can walk to the school, then less chances na magda-drop out. So I know that's a whole new debate, Your Honor, so I won't go there. But I'd also like to make a suggestion. I've always believed in this. I don't think the President should stick to his promise of no new taxes. And I do believe he actually clarified that during the campaign. But right now, I feel that the administration is a little bit has a phobia of raising taxes, especially because people have donor fatigue or tax fatigue or whatever. No? But I've been going around and asking people, if you give, if 5 centavos, if you add 5 centavos or 1 centavo or 3 centavo to a text message, payag ba kayo? Ayaw nung lahat. Pero if you tell them it will go to higher education, more than half will say okay. Or I did a simple computation, Your Honor. The Special Education Fund, which is an extra 1% in the real property tax collected by the local, is equivalent to 15 to 20 billion pesos a year. If you add another 1% for a special education fund for higher education, you will have 15 billion pesos, which will be about 15 million pesos for each and every, 150 million, if I'm correct, no? To each and every state university, no? And I did a simple computation for a 5 million peso condominium, no, which is usually in the Makati, Ortigas area, the Fort, etc. 5 million condo is a studio or a one-bedroom. No? The real property tax will be 20% assessed value. So 20% is only 1 million. Then 1% will be 10,000 pesos. Or if you want to lower it to half a percentage, which will give you 7.5 billion to 10 billion a year, it will only cost the owner of the luxury condominium an extra 5,000 pesos. And this is paid quarterly or 1,200, 2,500. And actually, it will be good for them in the long term. Why? The better the economy, the more people with jobs, the more people who finish college and have work, the more they will buy condos, and the more the people who paid this tax, tataas ang presyo ng condo nila. So I know this is just one example, Your Honor. I'm just saying that I think there's a fear in this administration of actually generating funds for their programs, no? So rather than finding a funding source for the SUCs, binabato sa kanila. Kayo na ang rent out yung lupa nyo and everything, but not everyone is like UP na merong prime land, Your Honor, na pwedeng i-rent out. I know many of these proposals you've also discussed in the future or their variations, Your Honor. I just wanted to put it on the floor for discussions because I know many of the allies of this administration are listening, and I'm hoping that next year will really be a year that many of these ideas will be put on the floor and for legislation, because the year after will be half time na. Kalahati na nung term, Your Honor. Your Honor, I'd like to just ask a specific question before I wrap up.
Yes.
When we passed I sponsored the amendments to the UP Charter, which Your Honor and Senator Kiko and many others authored, and you worked so hard for the alumni during that year. There was really a debate between some of the progressive members of the faculty and some of the more conservative members of the administration on whether or not we could sell land. The administration under President Roman wanted to raise revenues and was very pragmatic in saying, yung ibang lupa napupuno ng tao kasi nga hindi naman namin mapadiran. On the other hand, hindi namin pakinabangan. Well, the other some of the progressive groups in the university were saying, you cannot sell land, don't commercialize education, etc. We came up with to God's grace, we came up with a solution that was acceptable to both of them. They came out of the room, all groups were thinking na na-traidor yung isang group or bakit lahat nagsasmile, no? We came up with a solution that for the next 5 years, UP will be given 100 million a year as a centennial fund so that they will not sell their land. And they will use this 500 million, whether to develop some of it or whatever, to be able to be self-sustaining later on. I'd like to ask Your Honor if in next year's budget, did we give them part of their centennial fund?
Palagay ko yung centennial fund, binigay lang once ho lang.
So we have to wait another 100 years, Your Honor? Before
Siguro, we have to wait for the 200 years anniversary.
But may I just put on the record, Your Honor, that the agreement was 100 million a year for 5 years. And having said that, Your Honor, the president of PASOK right now was also the man behind, again, to God's grace, making the MUST. And if I'm not mistaken, in their charter, they were also guaranteed 50 million. Have they gotten any of that amount?
This
No.
legislative promise, Mr. President, is hardly kept. We have this higher education fund.
Yes.
That has never increased, I think, and has never been augmented. We said, okay, PAGCOR, sweepstakes, put in X% of your income to it. That's not a very regular, predictable flow, Mr. President. It's erratic. So, yes, you are quite right, Mr. President. Our promise to our...
We all share the pain, Your Honor, because when we pass it here, we really expect the DBM to put funding.
Yes.
But when we're forced to talk about the budget, parating san kukunin.
Yes.
So I'd just like to reiterate, maybe the problem is we have to find other sources of funds.
That's why I want to go back to your major premise, Mr. President, that there seems to be a reluctance to create new sources of revenue for government, even if it's taxation or levy or whatever. And I think slowly, I think we've got to reopen that door in the same manner that many administrations abroad, like President Bush said, no tax. Even this Tea Party Republican opposition now is saying, yes, we've got to have new taxes because otherwise our treasury will go bankrupt because of our high deficit. So no one should write in stone a promise not to raise taxation, Mr. President. As Senator Recto just very aptly pointed out in his sponsorship, we are a revenue-loving or a spending-loving country, but we forget that there must be some source for that spending, and that's taxation. And he pointed out the under-taxation of energy, the under-taxation of the so-called sin taxes of liquor, cigarette, and all that. And if we just start imposing, as you said, just even 1% to the special education fund, that will accumulate a lot of money that can be dedicated to the most essential of our social services, education, health, and housing. Like if you increase 1% to the special education fund, you will increase the special education fund of all LGUs by almost 10 billion pesos a year. So, and as you know, Mr. President, the IRA, the era of local governments have been increasing in aggregate. And if you just say, okay, the 20% of your development fund, 10% of that or 5% of that, please dedicate it to tertiary education. And that will bring in another 5 to 10 billion pesos to tertiary education. So there's so much so many ways, Mr. President, we can augment the financing of our public higher education if only there is some leadership signal that that's all right. Yes.
Your Honor, I just fixed my math, and first of all, the example of a special education fund, no, it doesn't have to be forever. It could be a 3-year program. It could be a 5-year
Time-bound.
Time-bound. And an additional 1%, which I said is 10,000 for every 5 million worth of condominium, no, will give you 15 billion to 20 billion, which will give each and every state you 150 million to 200 million. So if you give them 0.5% na lang po ang i-impose, no, you will give around 75 million for state you. Hindi masama. I mean, we will not be begging each other here. I mean, to God's grace, there are LGUs like Makati, Manila, Taguig, who spends a lot on their local colleges, but not all the state. If I'm not mistaken, Makati only relies on 6 to 8% ng IRA. But ang dami natin pong LGUs that are 70, 80, 90% dependent on IRA. So they cannot really fund scholarship programs or local colleges. And as you said, even if they can support local colleges, it doesn't mean that it will be quality local colleges. So I'll stop there, Your Honor. I know that all of these programs, the good chairperson and the chair are trying to put together, but maybe they can be part of the lobby group who will convince this administration that there has to be additional sources, and we really have to give a booster to our SUCs. Whether we do it indirectly through student loans and scholarships, or whether we do it directly by giving the money directly to them. But, Your Honor, just last, I'd like to mention, I know there's very poor payment when it comes to student loans, and that's why that's usually a deterrent in giving loans. And my mother always taught us that instead of pag may nangungutang sa'yo, bigyan mo na lang kung anong kaya mo, kasi unless you don't want to see that person anymore, pautangin mo, no? Kasi malamang hindi mo na makita, no? But kung gusto mo pang makita, bigyan mo na lang para at least hindi mo na sisingilin. But what if we pass the duty of paniningil to the SSS and GSIS? Simply put, if they have a job, magbabayad sila sa SSS and GSIS kung government. So kung may trabaho sila, di magbayad sila pa konti-konti. Pero kung walang trabaho, natural, wala naman po silang mababayad. You cannot squeeze blood from stone. No? So I think there's a pragmatic way of doing it. And having said that, Your Honor, can I just close also with, there's this study that I read in the newspaper, and I asked some of my staff to get it from the World Bank. It's a 200-page study, and I haven't read it yet. But basically, the summary was that we have been promising generations that more higher education, better life, better jobs, and better economy. But in the last few decades, it hasn't been happening. And their conclusion was that mali yung focus, and you mentioned that a while ago, that not because you have graduates and you have SUCs, and their proposal is really yung STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. Of course, you can never take out the arts dahil that's what makes the soul of the nation, no? Music, arts, culture, Your Honor. But maybe po yun ang pwedeng assignment natin sa CHEDs at SUCs for this year. Next year, I'd really like to see in the budget hearing an analysis of what the priority courses should be. And I think we have the best mechanisms to predict. For example, Your Honor, we passed the peso law. Each and every municipality has a peso, a public employment office. If the peso asks the companies that are present in their city before they get a business permit, ilan ang empleyado nyo ngayon, anong qualifications, what do you expect next year, 3 years, 5 years from now? If you grow, what kind of employees are you going to get? And if this information can be consolidated regionally or by province, then transmitted also to the SUCs, then they will know. If in Cagayan de Oro, the trend is towards science and technology, then we know that MUST is on the right track. But if the trend is towards technical education, then we know that we have to spend more, for example, in the test the schools than in the SUC. So I think, Your Honor, there's so much that can be done. And I know that they are already doing a lot. But I really think you use the right term, crossroads. No, and in a crossroads, you make the wrong turn, hindi madaling mag-U-turn at hindi madaling bumalik. Start ka na naman sa kusang ka nanggaling. So, Your Honor, maybe not to prolong the discussion right
but
today.
Before you sit down, Mr. President, let me, because I think you have hit a very sensitive nerve, and I think you put your finger to the issue of jobs, education in this age of information. The old promise that that more higher education, more and better jobs you will have is no longer true, as you said. Why? Because the quality of jobs, the nature of jobs, the demands of the world have completely changed. 5 years ago, you would never think that many of our young women graduates will be working at night on call centers. And yet, almost 600,000 of our bright young women are working at night. And the prospects are that in the next 3 years, about 1 million of them will enter that industry. This is almost unthinkable a decade ago, Mr. President. In fact, according to our law, it's prohibited to employ women working at night. But you see, the whole employment model has changed, and even the nature of work has changed. Now, it's still true that the higher education you have attained, the more higher education you have, the better pay you will get if that job is available. But those jobs may no longer be there. The jobs that are now in great demand are the so-called creative jobs, the animators, the artists, the painters, the engineers, the inventors. In other words, the so-called creative arts, as you said, arts and humanities, architecture and design, engineering, etc., are the ones in greater demand. Lawyers and accountants in New York are less in demand than artists and designers and architects. So the world has completely changed, and the education system must accommodate to that change. And I think I'm afraid, we are quite slow in responding to that almost radical transformation in the workplace and in the world of work, Mr. President. So I think that is what we've got to catch up to and confront. And then perhaps we'll slowly eliminate the mass of educated unemployed, even in our midst.
Your Honor, just to give an example to what you have explained and articulated, before in college, especially if you have a language elective, ang hinahabol mo yung degree mo And then, gusto mo lang ipasa yung language elective. But right now, kung call center rin ang pupuntahan mo, 30 to 50% ang premium if you know a foreign language.
That's right.
So, for example, Chinese o Japanese ang iyong language elective. Right now, baliktad. Yun ang gawin mong major.
That's correct, Mr. President.
And mas mataas ang makukuha mo. Also points to the fact that before, and when Your Honor sponsored and authored the law creating CHED, TESDA, and DepEd, there was really good reason to specialize. But right now, it's more of how the three groups of educators come together. For example, why do we have to teach language already in college or in TESDA schools when the fastest learners are in not even high school, elementary and kindergarten? Imagine if our schools start offering Chinese or Korean, Japanese, etc. And tanungin nyo kahit sino estudyante natin they have so much time na tumambay. And the only reason they're not taking up, for example, languages is because either mahirap or they don't do it as a barkada o kaya nagtatawanan. But as soon as they get out of elementary at high school and realize that the jobs available are call centers, and they realize that in their office, they're getting 15 to 20,000, but the one who can speak a foreign language is making 30, 35,000, they enroll suddenly in language institute. So precisely why parents are parents and children are children. Parents' role is to tell the children, sa elementary lang pag-aralan to. So I'm really looking forward, Your Honor, that we will have a longer discussion, maybe next year or maybe through the committees, of how all of these changes can be integrated in the DepEd, TESDA, and CHED, and how, you know, the problem can be more than just kulang ang pera. So thank you very much for giving me this time, and I apologize to the chairperson. I said a 2-week course, napunta tayo sa 2-year course, pero hindi pa rin umabot sa 4-year course, Your Honor. And again, I hope that some of our discussions here bear fruit, and I really hope that by next year we'll have identified some funding sources to be able to fund, you know, our SUCs. Magandang hapon, and thank you very much, Mr. President and Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. It's a great pleasure to respond to you.